Earlier in this episode, we had physio from UPMC Whitefield, Shane Walsh, talking about useful tips to prevent injury. But one of the things that we did decide upon, I suppose, is that as much and all as you can do your best to prevent the injury, injuries nonetheless will happen, and quite often. And I suppose it's a man you don't necessarily want to have to see throughout your running career, but orthopaedic surgeon Ian Kelly from UPMC Whitefield, you're going to talk to us about those common knee, foot, ankle problems that people have when they're running. And ideally, people would, rather meet you out running the roads, out socially. They don't necessarily want to be meeting you professionally.
Yes, absolutely. No one really wants to meet me professionally if they can avoid it at all.
We discussed briefly, I said to you, are you a runner? And you said, I run a bit. And then you spoke about Shane and how, he's a phenomenal triathlete, and only there earlier he was saying how no, I'm not great now. I just partake every now and then. But
perceptions are different, all right. Some people are avid runners, other people dabble in it. Some people do it intermittently. And then some people will just pick a particular target, like the upcoming marathon, be it the quarter or the half marathon, and focus on that and train for that, which is great. But unfortunately, injuries do occur. And I suppose the important thing for people training is to listen to their injuries. And there's very few times where the correct thing is to try and grin and bear and push on through an injury. And very much the advice is, if you have pain, you should listen to it and you should seek advice.
Okay. And we all every now and then get these little niggles, or, like I was only saying to Shane earlier, I had just one of those stupid incidents where I was running along the footpath, had to, cross, say, a housing estate along the road that I was running. And as I came off the footpath onto the road, just had a little roll on the ankle and, out for a couple of days after that.
Yes.
That's one of those kind of almost like an occupational injury on the grounds that it occurred instantly, and there was nothing necessarily that I could have done really, other than, I suppose, been a bit sharper on my feet.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we very much spoke about is that a lot of running injuries are acquired over time.
Yes.
And people do exactly the opposite to what you've just advised there. They don't listen.
Yes.
And I can categorically tell you I'm guilty of doing that on occasion.
As are most, particularly if you have a target and the event is coming up soon, you'll try and bash on through it. But unfortunately, you can often do yourself more damage and have yourself then out for a longer period. So the sort of common problems that people have is they develop what's called runner's knee. Now, runner's knee is a very broad term for pain globally across the front of the knee. And the reason that's thought to develop is because there's too much load going between the kneecap and the thigh bone. And a lot of that relates to a lack of flexibility and your running technique. So as I'm sure Shane was referencing earlier, stretching is really important. So I would meet a lot of people who are incredibly fit, who have very strong muscle groups, but they just don't stretch enough. And the consequence of that is overloading of the cartilage in underneath the kneecap, and then developing this global anterior knee pain, or pain on the front of the knee, particularly going down stairs or down hills. So if you start to develop that, it's worth attending a physiotherapist, it's worth resting, and don't forget about cross training. So when one area is injured, you can maintain your aerobic fitness by using your other muscle groups to maintain your heart rate, such as things like a cross trainer, where you can stand on the pads and you can use your arms to generate some of the power. And while you're not out running on the road, you're still maintaining your aerobic fitness. Or even kind of on a bike, kind of again, not pounding the roads, but at least maintaining your quad strength and flexibility while the injury is recovering. And
I think that's a really important thing to think about as well. And actually, one of the questions I asked you just, before we hit record on the podcast was, do you run? And you said, a bit, but you swim and cycle that bit more. Is that because of those reasons, perhaps? Is it? Yes.
I mean,
or is it just down to enjoy?
It's a bit of the lot. But I would see a lot of people who come in to me who are avid runners and say, running is all I do. It gives me my mental health, my physical health, and I need to do it. And on occasions, I have to say to people, listen, running is not a good long-term solution for you. And really you need to think about cross-training and finding other means of exercising. And that is one of the reasons why triathlons are becoming so popular, because performing one sustained type of exercise can cause repetitive stress problems. Whereas the pleasure of the likes of triathlons is your cross-training.
Yeah.
And if your knees start to get sore or your Achilles starts to flare up, then you can concentrate more on your cycling and your swimming, ease back on your running for a few weeks, work on your stretching, and then gradually reintroduce your running again. So again, you're maintaining your quality of life, you're maintaining your mental and physical health without aggravating the injury.
It's all very simple and sensible and easy to adopt.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, I do think like triathlons are fantastic because you're using every different muscle group, you know, and it does allow one area rest if it needs to rest.
Yeah. Something that I aspire to take part in at some stage, but I have yet to. And, you know, I could cycle, I can swim, but it's can I do all three consecutively? And then also, I suppose, it's a huge commitment to train.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've done a few small triathlons. And it's astounding the amount of time. And as you're getting stronger, be it in your running or your cycling, you feel your swimming is suffering, and trying to maintain them all is certainly a challenge. But it's a great challenge. They're great events.
Yeah, no, someday, perhaps the next series will be let's get triathloning as opposed to let's get running. So tell me, what are the most common injuries that you would see that people present themselves with?
Well, I suppose the most common would be this runner's knee phenomenon, which is irritation in behind the kneecap. And that's addressed with activity modification, which basically means easing back on the running, maintaining your fitness elsewhere, but working with a physio on both a stretching and strengthening exercise. Because the quadriceps muscle is called quadriceps because there's 4 components to it. And what typically happens is you get an imbalance between the outer and the inner quadriceps pull. And with that, the kneecap starts to drift outwardly, and therefore you get overloading in the outer part of the kneecap joint. So therefore, rebalancing the knee by strengthening up the inner quadriceps will often pull the kneecap back into an appropriate track, and therefore ease off the pain. So that's one that you would see. Another is a thing called IT band syndrome, which is your iliotibial band, which is this hard scar-type layer that runs down the outer side of your thigh and crosses over the outer part of your knee. And a lot of runners will get what we call IT band syndrome, where this scar tissue essentially is frictioning on the side of the knee. And with that, you can get inflammation and localised pain to the outer side of the knee. And again, that's down to appropriate stretching, appropriate rest, appropriate use of anti-inflammatories and icing. And then as the IT band itself loosens, the degree of friction becomes less and you can run better. Other problems include things like Achilles tendinitis, where patients get quite a lot of irritability just above where the Achilles attaches onto bone. And again, a lot of that is felt to be simply down to tightness and our running technique and the running surfaces. So what I'm often advising patients is to alter the pattern of running, alter their distances. Don't always run on the same terrain and in the same direction, because footpaths have a particular camber. And if you're running the same route the whole time, you're offloading your ankles to a degree, whereas you want to reverse routes every now and again, alter your distances and alter your intensities.
Very good. We had a colleague with plantar fasciitis not too long ago, and it seemed like a really inhibiting injury.
Yes, it is.
And it, like, again, it's one of those ones that, you kind of, well, for me anyway, I've heard it in conversation, but I've never actually known what it is. But am I right in saying this is a foot injury? It's
a foot injury. So in the same way as we call the surface of our hand, we call it our palm, we call the sole of the foot is called the plantar surface. And in the same way as in the palm you have layers of scar tissue, you have the same scar tissue in the sole of your foot. And opathy or itis means inflammation or wear and tear. So plantar fasciopathy just means wear and tear in the scar tissue in the sole of the foot. It's an incredibly common problem, and it's not just isolated to people who run. There are some people who do very little activity who can develop plantar fasciopathy pain. and it can be very disabling. And it typically presents as significant heel pain, worse first thing in the morning.
Right,
so the patient will say, when I get out of bed, it's exquisitely tender for the first 5 or 10 minutes. And then it gradually loosens out and I'm okay throughout the day. But then if I sit down to have my lunch or have a cup of tea, when I restart walking or reinitiate weight bearing, it's acutely painful again.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what we call start-up pain. So it's a very common problem. Now, there's a variety of reasons why it happens. One is some people put on weight and it's thought to be an overload problem, where if you put on some weight, that can cause too much weight going through the heel. But the biggest issue is thought to be tightness of our calves and hamstrings. So essentially, as we stride out and our heel contacts the ground, if our calves and hamstrings are a little too tight, our heel hits the ground too hard.
Yeah.
And then you develop this chronic irritation and chronic damage within the plantar fascia on the surface of the heel.
It's funny, as you talk about it, I'm nearly like moving my leg to counteract any possible, it's like you're watching something on the telly and you're kind of squeamish, as you see it, even as you talk about it there.
It's a sore thing.
Absolutely. And, I was saying to Shane earlier, and I'd say even listeners at this stage are like, we know you have a dodgy knee, because it's my one thing that, after a GA match in 2008, like I've always just said, I have a dodgy knee, because any activity that I do, there is some level of, I don't even want to call it pain. I call it awareness some days, because it's not quite sore. I'm just aware that, that I need to be conscious of it. And other times then it kind of flares up and whatever. But I wonder if it's, as you said there, that it's more the runner's knee rather than actually still lingering from an injury that was 11 years ago.
Well, you see, I mean, to you, I would say you should get that investigated.
Yeah.
Because if you got it investigated and there was no major abnormality found, which is most likely going to be the case, then you can be reassured that you can push on and not worry about it. So while you should never ignore pains, a lot of pains that are investigated, we find that it's an innocuous, not worrying issue. And then you can reassure the patient or the athlete to carry on, in a sensible, modified way.
Okay, well, that's not too bad then, because that's probably very much the advice that I have been given. And, even just, look, if it's quite sore now, rest, ice, vary your training. And I think it's to be honest, I feel like it's nearly a knock-on from the roll on the ankle last week, that it's the same leg. And and again, I was saying this to Shane earlier, that it was as I was coming down the hill from Grantstown Village back down towards the Solace Cancer Sports Centre, and it's it's a steep enough hill, and it was almost as I was running into the hill, I found like I was really hard breaking my stride, and it was as I got to the end, I was kind of going, oh shit, like this is this is worse than it's been for a long, long time. I'd say it's well over 12 months since I've had that. But it's the way you're talking about it there. I'm like, that literally, I'm going tick, 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 tick. That's just me all over.
Well, certainly, and the ankle roll that you describe, again, a very common problem, And again, what's important when I have a patient who says, I had a significant ankle roll, I'll ask them, well, how long were you out of action for? Now, if someone says, I was able to play on in the match or I was able to continue the run, that's very different to the patient who says, I was carried off, brought to the local A&E and had an X-ray taken. And one of the big misconceptions is that people who are brought to the A&E and have an X-ray taken, they're then told, your X-ray is normal, you don't have a fracture, so away you go. But in fact, those patients can have done a lot of soft tissue damage that needs a lot of treatment to rehab it. So I would always, if someone's having recurrent ankle rolling type injuries, emphasise the importance of going to somebody like Shane, get to a chartered physio, work on strengthening exercises to rebalance your muscle groups. And likewise, there's a thing called proprioception, which is knowing your position in space.
So, Shane touched on this. It was very interesting.
With your eyes closed, you know where your hand is, you know where your feet is. And in the same way as if you're rolling your ankle, if you have very astute proprioceptive fibres in your ankle, they'll send the signals to your brain, ankle starting to roll, fire the perineal muscles, don't let me go any further. So there's a huge amount that can be done in terms of rehabilitation to avoid that becoming a chronic problem.
It's mad, isn't it? Like signals the link between muscle and brain.
Yes.
And, and those signals that your body inherently does without you even knowing or realising.
And you see, it's something that we forget that you've got to keep fine-tuned, and the whole use it or lose it that everyone refers to is so true. And when I often give talks, I do talks to active retirement groups, and one of the things I emphasise is maintaining your balance. So if you think, as newborns, the average human can't walk till they're the age of 1, whereas most animals can get up and walk. So there's a huge degree of nerve development and muscle development that has to happen for us to regain to establish balance. And then the important thing is trying to maintain it over time. So whether you're a young runner or an older patient or an older individual who walks, balance is very important. And simply brushing your teeth while standing on one foot is a good way of kind of maintaining your balance ability.
Yeah, well, this is right up my street now because 2 birds, 1 stone sort of a task.
Yes.
Because where I struggle is when my physio, hello Connor, how are you, says grab the tennis ball, stand on one leg and just toss it against the wall and catch it, But I do that at home and the dogs are getting involved, and they're jumping to catch the ball in the middle of it. This, and it's just one of those stupid things that I just can't seem to do for the length of time that I'm supposed to be doing it. But brushing your teeth, they're just really simple things, and I'm sure I could probably do the same as I'm.
And the other thing is, every time you put the kettle on, stand on one leg.
Brilliant.
So stay on that one leg until the kettle is boiled.
Yeah. Are these sorts of illnesses, are they more common in runners because of the nature of the activity, or is it a case that maybe you're predisposed to those injuries anyway?
There's certainly an element of both, but what I say to people all the time is that my clinic is not full of runners.
Okay.
My clinic is full of non-runners.
Right.
Okay. So what I'm continually, and all of us are preaching to people, is the importance of weight control. So if you get heavy, you're going to have more injuries, and your ability to heal injuries becomes worse, and your pain scores go up. So I'm always preaching, get out and exercise. The other thing that we know is that cartilage, which lines the surface of the bone, gets its nutrition from loading.
Okay.
So loading joints helps joint health, whereas not using it, so sitting down on the couch, the joints will deteriorate. So it's counterintuitive, because I'm saying to people, you have wear and tear in your knee, but I want you to get out and use it more.
Yeah.
And that doesn't kind of make sense until you explain that the more you use it, the less weight you'll have, the stronger your muscles will be, the more nutrition your cartilage will get because you're now loading the joint, and the better mental and physical health you'll have anyway.
Yes.
So it is more a case of your people are genetically predisposed to these conditions rather than running caused it.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that I'm saying to someone that running is the root or the cause of your problem.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
more
that's good
typically
news.
the lack of running
Yeah.
that's the cause of the problem.
Wow, okay, that's good. Definitely good news. Are some of the injuries age-related or ability-related? I mean, that's probably kind of overlapping on the last question, but the age-related one for sure, I'm thinking if you are listening to this podcast and you're in your 50s and you're thinking to yourself, do you know what? Like, I've never run before and I'd love to get out and run. Is it ever too late to start running?
It is never, ever too late.
Okay.
And all of the studies now, and there's a huge amount of literature coming out on this, because we all live so much longer. And it's all about, a lot of studies have come from Asia, where a lot of 80 and 90-year-olds are participating in Asian Olympic Games, doing all sorts of athletic activities. And when you look at their muscle groups and you look at their heart function, physiologically they are 50-year-olds rather than 80-year-olds. So there's no doubt that by remaining active, you can reverse this process of age-related decline. And really, age-related decline is more sedentary-related decline. It's not an age-related thing.
That's really interesting.
It's the fact that as we get older, we tend to adopt a more sedentary lifestyle, and then we deteriorate. Whereas if you fight it and stay active the whole time, you won't age.
Oh, yeah.
But the other very useful information for people is that if you have let yourself deteriorate or become sedentary, it's never too late to start again. And there are all sorts of studies of taking groups of people, training for 6 months, looking at their bone mineral density, looking at their muscle mass, looking at their flexibility, looking at their strength, and examining them before 6 months and 6 months later. And having got involved in an exercise program, regardless of your age, you can improve strength, balance, bone mineral density, everything.
Wow.
So this kind of sedentary related decline can be reversed.
Yeah. You'd often hear people saying, you know, oh no, like women of a certain age, they shouldn't run because they're more prone to osteoporosis, or even people my own age who are like, no, I just can't run because of whatever.
Yeah. There's very few whatevers.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I accept that not everyone is designed to run. And if you're significantly overweight and haven't run in 10 years, the last thing you want to do is buy a pair of runners and go for a run.
Yeah.
You need to start with some weight loss. You need to start with good walking and gradually build up. And then introduce a little bit of running with walking and slowly build it up. Because you can do yourself damage if you go from nothing to trying to do a 5K run.
Yeah.
But certainly it's never too late to start, and the more you do on a graduated basis, the better.
Excellent. It's lovely to hear from somebody who's actually in the know. And as you said, your clinic isn't full of runners. It's full of people who don't run. And
exactly.
You know, and the amount of people who've said to me over the years, if you run too much, it'll be bad for your bones, it'll be this, it'll be that. But I'm like, no, I will play you the podcast that I did where the orthopaedic surgeon told me that running is better for you than not running.
Exactly.
All right, well, that's a nice way to finish. Ian Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us. And again, you know, if anybody has like any questions or anything about running in general, you can always reach out to us. You can get us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or at WLR FM across the board. And we'll get this up and we'll podcast each of these episodes every Thursday on WLRFM.com/running. Ian, thank you so much.